I'm Andy Brown. I'm going to talk to you very quickly to give you a kind of an overview, a high-level kind of background to why we think, we really absolutely need resilient ecosystems to deliver, our core services. And then I'm going to hand over to Richard, who's going to give you some examples of some of the collaborative work that we've been doing with the agricultural community. So, Rich, do you want to switch on to the next slide? So, just to kind of give you that kind of long-term background. So, as a water company, we obviously work over fairly long timescales, and although we work on a 5-year kind of detailed kind of management plan, business plan approach, we're actually looking at much longer horizons. And what we've seen through the kind of conversations with stakeholders and with customers, particularly kind of in that 25-year horizon, in developing what we call our strategic direction statement, is a number of things really coming to the fore in terms of those long-term objectives. And those are the 4 things listed up on the kind of top left-hand corner. And 2 of them are particularly relevant to this and very much driven by the common challenges that we all face around, changing climate, the climate crisis that we're experiencing, before COVID hit us, and but also the kind of how to deal with a growing population in the UK, and particularly in the east of England. So the top one, resilient to the risks of drought and flooding, ensuring that the east of England, and not just us, the whole of the east of England are resilient, is really important. And then the last one there, working with others to achieve significant improvement to ecological quality across our catchments. These are things that have come out from our consultation with customers as being hugely important, that we've got a massive role to play, but we can't deliver that on our own. And just to kind of put it into the kind of context of how important this has become to us as a company, we have always felt that what we do, the services that we deliver, are beyond the kind of normal kind of business realm. Water is so important, so vital to everybody, kind of in the community, in the region, to our environment, to the wealth and well-being of our communities, that we work in the public interest to deliver that service. But I don't think it was always seen like that. So actually what our board did last July was take the commitment kind of to the next level and actually embed purpose into our Articles of Association, the core document that governs how we manage our company. And in the blue box, that's the kind of shorthand version of our purpose now, which is to bring environmental and social prosperity to the region we serve through our commitment to love every drop. And love every drop is the kind of way we articulate this. So to be able to do that, we've got to be able to understand how we're influencing, that wider landscape, and how we make decisions based on something more than financial considerations and the kind of final outputs of our kind of manufactured capital. And in developing something that we're doing at the moment with our customers, which we're calling a social contract, we've been looking at some additional commitments. And one of those commitments is around our business plan outcome of investing for tomorrow, which is about incorporating a wider set of values in our decision-making kind of framework. And that's what we call the 6 capitals. And what's particularly relevant kind of to today's discussion is how we think about natural capital, both within our business and the decisions that we make as a company, but actually much more importantly, how that influences the wider management of landscape and how that influences the things that we need to do to deliver our vital service. So from a natural capital perspective at Anglian Water, we've been doing a lot of work looking at the kind of the same things that Andy was just showing on those slides, the impacts on carbon, the impacts on biodiversity, the impacts on soils. And we've been developing kind of some baseline assessments of biodiversity across our asset base. But our board wanted us to go further and understand what the implications of us managing our sites, our assets, our operations would have on the wider regional baseline. So a little while ago, we undertook a piece of work with the University of East Anglia to look at kind of what would an asset register, what would some sort of baseline for natural capital look like for the whole of the east of England. And that piece of work was done and published, and that's on our website, and you can go and have a look at that. It's all kind of open source data. But that led us to the conclusion that we needed to work with a greater range of organisations to understand this and to find some like-minded businesses particularly, and going back to Andy's point, businesses are critical in this if we want to kind of change a kind of collaborative approach. So building on some fantastic work that we've been involved with many other kind of organisations, which is something called Water Resources East, which is a multi-sector approach to long-term water resource planning across the east of England, a very different approach to managing and thinking about water resources than we used to. We've started to bring a group of organisations together under the banner of Natural Capital East. And that's to start looking at, what are a set of metrics and a baseline and a kind of way of thinking about natural capital at a regional scale. What does that look like, and what benefits will that bring a kind of whole host of different organisations? Now, this is in its infancy, but it's something we're developing with a number of different businesses and with some local enterprise partnerships and with input from a number of organisations to think about how we might change the way we monitor, we think about, we manage natural capital at the landscape scale to kind of create a much more collaborative approach to some of the challenges that we face. I haven't got time to kind of go into the detail of that today. So what I'm going to do now is actually hand over to Richard, who is going to take us through some of the examples of where we have been working collaboratively with agriculture and other land managers on some of the specific issues that kind of cross boundaries and impact our ability to deliver our vital services. Richard, over to you.
Cool, thanks, Andy. So I joined Anglian Water about 6 years ago. I felt like I was fairly unusual in the company, that I came from an agricultural background rather than a more engineering. And what really struck me was that the water industry is a very traditional sector in terms of the infrastructure that it's got in. A lot of materials and facilities have been in for 20, 30, 50 years. Approaches tend to be fairly conservative, tend to be very risk averse. And, that's really important because we're providing such a vital service. We can't afford things to go wrong. But it does mean that often processes lack that flexibility to be fleet of foot, to embrace new ideas, new ways of doing things. And often the new ways of doing things are exactly where we want to be going. So, there's a preference for engineered solutions that can have a dialed in certainty rather than the more environmentally based services that are far more difficult to put a fixed number of certainty onto. And what was really interesting was that even 6 years ago, I could see that the company's approach was moving more to kind of considering, well, what sort of other alternatives could we look at in terms of managing some of the big issues. So I was brought in to look after the agriculture team, and our primary focus was a pesticide called Metaldehyde. I'm sure some of you on the call are familiar with it. Others aren't. It's the active ingredient in slug pellets. And as a pesticide, it's the single biggest challenge to Anglian Water. It's not a health-based challenge, but drinking water standard compliance means we need to get to 0.1 micrograms per litre for any pesticide in the drinking water. That's a kind of throwaway number, but practically that's equivalent of one M&M in a Olympic-sized Olympic-sized swimming pool. One stem of hay in 111,000 bales, 1 grain of wheat in 390 tons. It is an absolutely staggeringly small number, but those are the standards that we are held to. The problem is that Metaldehyde, for all practical purposes, is untreatable. So we face the challenge of a pesticide that can't be engineered away, but we're also having massive issues. And in 2014, we had 50 failures on Metaldehyde. As I said, it wasn't a health-based standard, but in terms of our standards that we need to stick to is a really major significance. So the first step that we took in, the engineers got involved and they were very pleased. It was we built a new reservoir called Hall. We couldn't build it legally. We couldn't build a facility that was knowingly non-compliant from the start. So this was to provide resilience for Lincoln. It wasn't a massive facility, engineered for 20 megalitres a day. By comparison, Anglian Water serving over 1,000 megalitres a day. So relatively small, but the problem was that we couldn't have any Metaldehyde failures. Now, Hall was a really interesting engineering challenge. And our engineers, I don't know what half the things are in this box here, but essentially all of those went into this very small building in the centre. It cost us £42 million to build. What was really important about that number is if we scale it up to hit the facilities that we would need to provide treatment of metaldehyde across the Anglian region, that's £600 million to scale that up, which in the current environment, let alone 6 years ago, wasn't even vaguely economically feasible. So the business had to really step to one side and say, well, can we take a new perspective? Can we look at this challenge in a different way? Instead of trying to engineer our way out of solutions, can we look at what the business talked about as an innovative solution of catchment management, but can we look beyond the gates of the treatment works and kind of get to understand, well, why these products have been used, and can we work with the outside to actually get a solution to the internal? And that's where our catchment management program was born, and a project that we called Slug It Out. And essentially that involved building a team of people that weren't from the water industry. It won't surprise you to know our HR department was moderately perturbed when I said I didn't want somebody from a water industry background. What we really needed if we were going to talk to agriculture was people that had technical credibility. So if you're talking about pesticides, make sure you've got a basis certificate so you can talk those sort of languages. Make sure that you're aware of the social dynamics on the farm. So whether it be the difference between green and blue tractors, whether it be understanding what crop is in the ground, this is not an area where our scientists, brilliant as they are, really have the kind of remit to add. It's really focusing on making sure that we've got the making sure the right people. We took a two-tiered approach. So the first area was looking at abstraction management, which was those areas where we could switch our pumps on and off, making sure that our managers, our supply managers had a good understanding what was happening on the ground, so they had the best information. So when we knew there was a metaldehyde risk, we turned the pumps off. We didn't bring the water in. But if we didn't know that if there wasn't a challenge to metaldehyde, we could keep pumping. But that didn't necessarily apply in all areas. So around our reservoirs, we can't control what's going into them. So we needed to do a different plan. And that's where we launched the program called Slug It Out. This was essentially targeted around each of our reservoirs. At its peak, we were focusing on 8 catchments. We were talking to 213 farmers, covering 23,500 hectares of land. And one of the key aims we had was, although a lot of other water companies were saying, yeah, you probably need 60 to 7% uptake, our concern is if we're going to be doing a scheme, we should be aiming to get 100% uptake, because if one person doesn't necessarily follow the scheme, because metaldehyde so little can cause a problem, if the farmer at the top of the catchment uses metaldehyde and has an issue, all the benefits further down the catchment are going to be negatively impacted. So we set the challenge of 100% uptake, which gives far more social challenges than it does necessarily logistics. We offered the farmers essentially a 3-tiered payment, involved a hosting fee because we're running a trial and we're getting a lot of information from them, a direct substitution, and what we called a water quality bonus, which was an incentive at the end. If we achieve what we need, well, they've been part of the solution. And that's very much where we would like to move to in the future. It is rewarding for outcomes rather than doing a relatively simple approach. And it's really about building those sort of scenario beyond metaldehyde. If we look at this as just a tool for metaldehyde, we've lost a huge opportunity. So we're looking to build those resilient long-term partnerships that Andy was Andy number 1 was alluding to at the beginning. So the scheme we did was great, but what difference did it make? And it was really important to understand that to the business, getting the metaldehyde down to below 0.1 was really important, but there's all sorts of other measures of success that were just as important. First one was that 100% uptake. It was a voluntary scheme, and it always is a voluntary scheme, but for the 5 years that we've run it, we've had every single farm around every single catchment sign up to it, which means that there's something there that's building that credibility. We've also had 64% of the farmers try some element of cultural control. So considering options other than just reaching for a bottle chemical, which is absolutely what we want. For the folk inside the company, we had a 98% reduction in metaldehyde from the levels that we saw in 2014. So really good practical benefits. And probably the thing that I'm most proud of is that when we talked to the farmers and said, well, we've been subsidizing just around the land in our reservoirs, but is there any other areas that, based on what you learned, you would be prepared to use it? And we've had 13,500 hectares of land that we're not paying any subsidy to do, but the farmers are deciding to use it. Now, I think that's about the wider message that we're doing, and it's certainly where we want to be moving in the future. But it doesn't always work fine. And I think one of the most important things is to recognize that when the systems, when the plans are put together, it's an opportunity when it doesn't work to learn and to refine what we're doing. So we found areas where there was agricultural sources of metaldehyde over 5 years, and the number of farmers that we had, that wasn't surprising. But we also found urban sources. So sometimes allotments were sources, sometimes gardens and those sort of things. And it's important to keep your eyes open and realize that we're working with a natural system. We're not necessarily going to engineer our way through every solution, but also don't discount options. So the more we learn, the more we do, the more we refine the system. But I think sometimes we try and refine it too much and we maybe lose an opportunity. So those are the difference that it makes. And I think I would very much encourage anybody that's working with Anglian Water, think of measures of success. What are other than the primary one? What are the secondary measures that we might be doing? As I said, things like voluntary uptake and cultural controls were really important in this trial. The other work that we're doing, there will be other measures, and understanding that is really important to emphasizing the value of these sort of more holistic approaches. So looking forward, I think one of the most important things that we've done through the 5 years of being involved with Slug It Out is we've earned an element of credibility. We're never going to be ahead of that game there. We're always going to be learning, and we're always going to be talking. But we've earned the right to at least have a conversation. And I think if we get nothing else, that's important. We've earned the right to start talking about bigger things. So one of the approaches that we have underlying everything, and if you look at the Slug It Out logo, it has healthy crops, healthy water. One of the things we're evolving our approach to do is healthy crops, healthy soils, healthy water, because soil health, soil management, I think is a fundamental that is going to be driving what we're doing going forward. And it delivers so many different benefits across the business. It needs refinement, it needs locally targeting, and certainly a lot of things we do needs to be relevant to Anglian Water for us to be able to support it. But very much we want to be engaged, and a lot of you will look at this picture and just say, well, this is a picture of somebody digging a hole. When I show these slides to people in Anglian Water, this is the most important picture, the one in the center, because the guy in the hole there is Peter Simpson, who's our CEO. And to show that the man in charge of the company is quite happy to get his hands dirty, to understand that aspect, is really important in building our credibility internally. But it also shows that he gets this wider understanding of catchment management and essentially what Andy has alluded to. So in summary, essentially our learnings from catchment management that we're looking to take forward is firstly understand the problem. And one of the things that really resonates for me here was when I talked to a farmer at the beginning of Slug It Out and was talking about metaldehyde problem. And he said to me, young man, you've got to remember one thing here, that metaldehyde is Anglian Water's problem. Slugs are my problem. And one of the big things that we're doing now is really understanding the context of things. We don't have the right to talk about things in our world. We need to be understanding from other people's perspectives and how they see it. The second half is embracing innovation. Everybody's got different ideas. On the farm, you're seeing things in different perspectives and in different ways, and there's multiple ways to achieve things. So cultural controls, chemical controls, there's multiple ways of working against the slugs. And probably the important final one is that we want to have business-to-business conversations. Anglian Water is a commercial business. Agriculture is a commercial business. There are drivers that we both have, there are constraints that we both have, but we can work together for these solutions. And as we look at the Environment Bill, we look at the Agriculture Bill, and we also look at the challenges that the water industry's got. There's a lot more opportunities to work together. So yeah, that's it from